How do the unique physical demands on male dancers, things like partnering, jumps, turns, and lifting, shape the way that you might design strength programs specifically for them?
Yeah. Okay. So this is where it's quite interesting because we have this idea, obviously, within strength and conditioning, within weight training, of specificity, right? Trying to get to a specific result and designing the training for that specific result. My take on it is that the specific result is going to come more from the skills training that we do in the studio. So thinking about, like, if we're wanting to be able to do an overhead press lift effectively, lifting a human above your head is very different to lifting a barbell with plates on it, right? Mainly because the weight distribution is not even. You're not dealing with a static weight. You're dealing with something that is actually moving and trying to stabilize itself as well on top of on top of your hands. So it's not just as simple as obviously saying, okay, well, go and do 3 sets of 10 overhead press with a barbell, and that's going to just make everything work. My thought process is, instead of it just being like, okay, well, we need to mimic the requirements of the dancing in the gym, and that's what's going to then help you to improve. My thought process is, well, let's look at the functional weaknesses of the dancer. Let's say, okay, we need to do some assessments and say, okay, this dancer has maybe some anterior tilt. Maybe their shoulder mobility is not there to be able to get their hands directly above their head, so we need to work on some shoulder mobility. Maybe what's happening when they go to lift is they're finding that anterior tilt is causing more lordosis in the lift, which is potentially then putting their spine under impact. And so we need to find those exercises that are going to not make them as much of a risk when they're doing the skill. Right, so things to maybe develop core strength. Maybe there's hip flexor tension that needs to be reduced. That's causing them to go into that lordosis. Maybe the core strength isn't there to support it while they're doing the overhead movement. So then it's like, okay, now we've assessed. We've said, okay, I understand what this dancer specifically needs to be able to implement the moves correctly and train those skills without risk. And now I can create a program for them that is going to take those skills and train them. So if it is overhead press that they need to work on, but they are having that low back arch and they're not able to support that, let's really focus on the form of that overhead press. So it's not just about pushing the weight above their head. It's how are they doing it? How are they training for that? And maybe it's not doing 3 sets of 10. Maybe it's doing 5 sets of 3, where it's not about how many reps they're doing, but more about how well they're executing those reps. Because if you think about how many times potentially we would do a press in a ballet, it might be 4 or 5 times, right? You're not necessarily going to do 30 of them in one ballet. You'll do other lifts, but it's not necessarily all going to be overhead. So then taking that and saying, okay, well, let's put them under an 80% load. Let's figure out what their 1 rep max is based on maybe a 5 rep, and then we kind of calculate that out. And then we say, okay, well, this is what their 1 rep is. This is what their 5 rep is. Let's figure out how we can train them at 80% of that for 5 reps, for 5 sets. And then they're building that strength. We're not making them overexert, because also that's a problem that dancers face. They tend to overtrain because of how much the studio or the ballet company is pushing them. And it becomes more about developing, first of all, the neurological patterns, the muscle connection, and then developing strength, as opposed to just like, let's just smash this dancer in the gym for no reason to break them down. So my focus is generally, let's figure out what that dancer needs based on their anatomy and their potential anatomical abnormalities, potential postural abnormalities, and then we'll adjust from there and see how they progress.